The train screeched into Copper Ridge Station, spewing a cloud of cold smoke that smelled like the end of the line, which for me, it was. I stepped onto that weathered platform with a carpet bag in one hand and a telegram in the other. The telegram was a promise. The bag held everything I owned in the world. My name is Margaret Louise Campbell, and I'd traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger. The wind bit hard, a real Colorado welcome. It promised an early winter and no second chances. I pulled my dark green wool dress tighter, the seams straining. Back in Hartford, my stepmother said no decent man would court a woman who takes up 2 spaces in a church pew. So she gave me an ultimatum. Find a husband or find the street. The telegram was my answer. 6 months of letters to a man named James Mitchell, a widower, a rancher, a father of 2. He needed a practical wife. I was practical. I could cook, sew, and manage a household better than any woman in Connecticut. I was educated. I was strong. I had what the letters called a robust constitution. I just hadn't mentioned what the kids on Main Street called me. They had rhymes, cruel little songs about the preacher's fat daughter. I didn't put those in the letters. The platform was emptying, families hugging, men tipping their hats. I searched the faces, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was looking for a man who represented my last hope. Then I saw him, a tall man in a brown suit walking toward me. His face was etched with expectation, a hopeful look that curdled the second his eyes landed on me. It was a look I knew better than my own reflection. It was a look of poorly concealed shock. "Miss Campbell?" he asked. There was a desperate plea in his voice, a prayer that I was somebody else, anybody else. "Mr. Mitchell," I said. My voice didn't shake. I wouldn't give him that. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." The pleasure was all mine. His face was a closed door. He was maybe 40, with thinning hair and a mustache that couldn't hide the bitter downturn of his mouth. He was thinner than I'd imagined, gaunt, his hands fidgeting with his hat. He couldn't look at me. His gaze darted to the station roof, the distant mountains, the dirt at my feet. Anywhere but at the woman who was too much. "Yes. Well," he cleared his throat. "The wagon is just over here. We ought to get going before dark." The ride to his homestead was a masterclass in silence, an excruciating, heavy silence that pressed down on me harder than my corset. I sat as straight as I could, trying to shrink, trying to take up less space on the wagon seat. But my hips still brushed against his, and I could feel him flinch, pulling away as if burned. The Colorado landscape was beautiful, in a stark, unforgiving way. Rolling grasslands, distant purple mountains. It was a land that didn't care about the size of your waist or the cruelty of children's rhymes. It was vast and empty, and I had never felt so alone. He finally spoke when we were halfway there. "The children. Sarah's 10 and Thomas is 7. They've had no female guidance since their mother passed." "I understand," I said softly. "I have experience with children." He just nodded, his knuckles white on the reins. Whatever dream he'd held of a wife, I had shattered it just by showing up. The homestead appeared as the sun bled across the horizon. A modest farmhouse, a barn, a curl of smoke from the chimney. For a second, a foolish, dangerous flicker of hope ignited in my chest. This could be a home. 2 small faces peered from the front window, then vanished. James helped me down from the wagon with a mechanical politeness that was worse than open disgust. His touch was brief, impersonal. "Children," he called as we reached the porch. "Come meet Miss Campbell." The door creaked open. A girl with tangled blonde hair and suspicious eyes stepped out, a younger boy hiding behind her skirts. They stared. Their eyes were wide, honest, and brutal. "She's awfully big, Papa," the boy whispered. It wasn't quiet enough. It never is. "Thomas!" James's voice was sharp with embarrassment, mortification. "It's quite all right," I said, my voice gentle, though the words were acid in my throat. I knelt down, the corset biting into my lungs. "You must be Sarah and Thomas. I've heard so much about you." Sarah stepped forward, her chin high in defiance, a tiny general guarding her fort. Mama wasn't fat, she announced. The blow was physical. It knocked the air from my lungs, the hope from my heart. I kept my expression kind. It was the only weapon I had left. I'm sure your mama was a very beautiful lady, I said. I'm not here to replace her, only to help take care of you. We don't need taking care of, Sarah shot back. But I saw the clumsy patch on her dress, the worn-through toes of her brother's shoes. James cleared his throat. The sound was like gravel grinding. Children, go wash up. Miss Campbell and I need to discuss arrangements. As they disappeared inside, he turned to me. His face was a mask of distress. Miss Campbell, I fear there's been a misunderstanding. I believe I mentioned having a robust constitution, I said, my cheeks burning with a familiar shame. Robust? He gestured helplessly at me, his hand waving away my entire being. I didn't expect. This is a working ranch, Miss Campbell. Life here requires stamina, the ability to move quickly. The children, they need stability, not another adjustment. It was coming. The same speech, different mouth. The world began to close in. The vast Colorado sky felt like a coffin lid. What exactly are you saying, Mr. Mitchell? I asked, but I already knew the answer. He took off his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture of a man trapped. I'm saying this arrangement won't work. I'll pay for your return passage to Connecticut, of course. There's a hotel in town. You can stay there until the next eastbound train on Monday. My mind raced. I had exactly $3.47 to my name. My stepmother's door was closed to me forever. I had no one else. No other prospects. No other choices. This was it. The end of the line. Mr. Mitchell, I began, my voice miraculously steady. Perhaps you could give me a chance. A trial. I'm an excellent cook. A peerless housekeeper. Surely these qualities matter more than my appearance. His expression softened, but only with pity. That was worse. Miss Campbell, this isn't just about housework. My neighbors, the community, I'm trying to build a reputation. I need a wife who reflects well on my standing. He didn't have to say it. I didn't reflect well. I prompted whispers. I was the butt of jokes. I was the woman children sang songs about. I see, I said quietly. Dignity was all I had left. A threadbare coat against a blizzard. Relief washed over his face, so pure and total it was another slap. The Copper Ridge Hotel is clean and decent, he said quickly. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor, is a good woman. I'll speak to her myself. The ride back to town was in darkness. I stared up at the indifferent, star-filled sky and knew I had made the most terrible mistake of my life. The warm lights of the Mitchell homestead, the home that was never mine, grew smaller and smaller until they were swallowed by the vast black night. The Copper Ridge Hotel was clean, decent, and smelled of fried bacon and quiet desperation. Mrs. Henderson, a woman with kind eyes and a face that had seen too many sad stories, showed me to a small room at the back. Staying long? She asked, her tone gentle. Just until Monday, I replied, my voice flat. Taking the eastbound train. She gave me a look that said she knew the whole story. Another mail-order bride shipped out and shipped back like faulty merchandise. Well, breakfast is from 6 to 9, she said, and left me alone. Alone. The word was a physical weight. I sat on the narrow bed, and the full force of my situation crashed down on me. I was stranded, penniless, and utterly without hope. Returning to Hartford was impossible. My stepmother's triumphant, "I told you so," would be the last thing I heard before she threw me out for good. The walls of the room seemed to press in, just like the walls of my life. Always too much, always taking up too much space. Through the thin partition, I could hear the murmur of voices from the restaurant below, the sound of other people living their lives while mine had ground to a halt. I unpinned my hair, letting it fall in dark waves around my shoulders. In the dim lamplight, I almost looked pretty. But pretty wasn't enough. Pretty couldn't get you a husband if you were built like a draft horse in a world that wanted Shetland ponies. I was a woman built for a world that no longer existed, if it ever had. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I drifted off, I heard that little boy's voice. "She's awfully big, Papa." I woke up to the gray, cold dawn of Copper Ridge and the stark, freezing reality of being well and truly ruined. I put on my somber brown dress, the one I hoped made me look smaller, and went down for breakfast. The talk in the small dining room stopped the second I walked in. It was a sudden, heavy silence that screamed louder than any shout. Every eye was on me. I was the morning's entertainment, the rejected bride. Mrs. Henderson bustled over with a coffee pot and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, dear. Eggs this morning?" "Just coffee, please," I said. My stomach was a roaring, empty cavern, but I couldn't eat, not with them watching. I'd learned long ago that eating in public only invited more judgment. I took a table in the corner, trying to become invisible. It didn't work. A woman near the window leaned toward her friend. I caught the words. "The Mitchell woman. Can you imagine? Poor James." The whole town knew. Of course they did. News in a place like this traveled faster than a prairie fire. A young man with bright, curious eyes and a small notebook approached my table. "Excuse me, miss. Billy Walsh, from the Copper Ridge Gazette. Wonder if you might have a few words about your journey west? A human interest story." My coffee cup rattled in its saucer. "I'm afraid there's no story here, Mr. Walsh." "Oh, but there is," he insisted, his pencil poised. "The romance of it all. The courage to travel across the country to marry a stranger. Our readers would love to hear about your experiences." My experiences. The words caught in my throat. "Mr. Walsh," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the room. "Some stories don't have happy endings suitable for a newspaper." His eager smile faltered. He mumbled an apology and retreated. I was left alone, the specimen in the jar, the cautionary tale. Just then the door opened and James Mitchell walked in. His eyes found me immediately. He approached my table, his hat clutched in his hands like a shield. "Miss Campbell," he said stiffly, "complications with the train schedule." I looked up at him, my eyes tired. "What sort of complications?" "The eastbound broke down outside Denver. It won't be repaired until Wednesday at the earliest." He shifted his weight, unable to stand still. "I'll cover the additional hotel expenses, of course. 3 more days in this fishbowl. 3 more days of being stared at, whispered about, pitied. Something inside me, something I thought had died on that wagon ride, snapped. "Mr. Mitchell," I said, my voice clear and firm, surprising even myself. "In your letters, what did you envision in a wife? What was so important that my size overshadowed every other quality I possess?" He flinched, glancing around the room. Everyone was listening. "Miss Campbell, perhaps we could discuss this elsewhere." "No," I said. "I think the whole town already knows my business, so please enlighten me. What makes a woman acceptable?" His face reddened. "It's about practicality. A man needs a partner who can keep up, who won't be a burden." "A burden," I repeated. "And you determined I would be a burden by looking at me for 5 minutes." "I don't wish to be cruel, miss," he said, his voice dropping. "But yes, some things are just obvious." The brutal honesty of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just rejecting me, he was erasing me. My education, my skills, my character, they meant nothing. My body was my entire story, and he had judged it unworthy. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Mitchell," I said, my voice cold as a winter stone. "I understand your position completely." He practically ran from the restaurant, leaving me in the wreckage of his honesty. I sat there staring into my cold coffee, a statue of humiliation, the rejected bride of Copper Ridge. But as I sat there, a new feeling began to stir beneath the shame, a tiny, hard ember of anger. He thought I was a burden. He thought I was unacceptable. He had no idea what I was capable of, and I suddenly had a burning desire to show him, to show all of them. I just didn't know how. I was trapped here until Wednesday, with $3.47 and a reputation that was already in tatters. What in God's name was I going to do? The morning stretched on, an eternity of quiet judgment. I tried to read in the hotel's sitting room, but the whispers from the hallway made it impossible to concentrate. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out, to walk, to breathe air that wasn't thick with pity. I stepped out onto the dusty main street of Copper Ridge. It was a simple town, a single street of false-fronted buildings against a backdrop of endless plains and distant, snow-capped mountains. I paused in front of the mercantile, looking at a display of ladies' dresses. They were all cut for tiny, willowy women. Even the largest size wouldn't fit me. It was another reminder that this world wasn't built for me. Admiring the new arrivals from Denver? A voice asked beside me. I turned. A woman about my own age with kind eyes and a face weathered by the sun stood there. She wore a practical calico dress and an apron. They're lovely, I said cautiously. I'm Ruth Caldwell, she said, extending a work-roughened hand. My husband owns the livery. You must be the lady from Connecticut. Of course she knew. Everyone knew. I shook her hand. Margaret Campbell. Would you like to walk with me? She offered. I'm headed to the post office. You look like you could use some company that isn't whispering behind your back. The offer was so direct, so free of judgment, that I agreed immediately. We walked down the wooden sidewalk, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I could breathe. You know, Ruth said, her voice conversational, I came west as a mail-order bride myself, 15 years ago. Nearly turned right around and went back home the first week. I looked at her, surprised. What changed your mind? Stubbornness, mostly, she laughed, and the realization I had nowhere else to go. Sometimes the only way forward is forward. We reached the post office, a small building with a bulletin board covered in notices. Ranch hands wanted. Horses for sale. Upcoming church social. Ruth collected her mail, and as we stepped back outside, she turned to me, her expression serious. Mrs. Campbell, Margaret, may I offer some advice? She said. This is a small town. People talk. You're this week's news. Next week, it'll be something else. Don't let their gossip chase you away. I appreciate that, I said, but I'll be gone by Wednesday. Will you? She asked, her gaze steady. And where will you go? The question hit me like a physical blow. I had no answer. Back to my stepmother's scorn. Back to a life of apologies for the space I occupied. Perhaps, Ruth said gently, you shouldn't be so quick to leave. This territory has opportunities for women willing to work hard. Not everything has to be about finding a husband. The idea was radical, terrifying. What could a woman like me do on her own? I was educated, yes, but my only skills were domestic. Who would hire me? Before I could answer, a commotion erupted down the street. A group of men were gathered near the bank, their voices sharp with alarm. Someone was on the ground. Come on, Ruth said, and hurried toward the crowd. I followed, my desire to remain invisible suddenly overwhelmed by an instinct to help. An elderly man was lying on the sidewalk, his face a ghastly pale, his breathing shallow. The men standing around him looked helpless. Someone fetch Doc Morrison, one of them yelled. He's out at the Patterson Ranch. Won't be back till evening, another replied. I didn't think. I acted. I pushed through the circle of useless men and knelt beside the unconscious figure. My father was a minister, and for years I had been his shadow, visiting the sick and the dying in our parish. I knew what to do. I felt for his pulse. It was thready and weak. I checked his breathing and noticed the blue tinge around his lips. He's had some kind of attack, I announced, my voice clear and authoritative. It didn't sound like my own. We need to get him somewhere warm and elevate his feet. Can someone help me move him? The men just stared at me. A woman, and a woman of my size, taking charge. The idea was foreign to them. Are you sure you know what you're doing, ma'am? One of them asked, his tone doubtful. More sure than anyone else here appears to be, I snapped back. Now, are you going to help me, or shall we let him die on the sidewalk while we debate my qualifications? That shamed them into action. Two of them carefully lifted the man, and I directed them into the bank manager's office, onto a small couch. I loosened his collar, elevated his feet, and sent someone for cold water and cloths. What's his name? I asked as I worked. Samuel Hartwell, the bank manager said, wringing his hands. Owns the grain mill. He's been having these spells lately. Has he been under strain? I asked, applying a cool cloth to his forehead. His wife died last spring, the manager admitted. He's been trying to manage the mill all alone. A crowd had gathered, peering into the office. The whole town was watching. They were watching the rejected bride, the woman who was too big and too much, the woman who was now the only thing standing between a good man and his grave. Just then, Mr. Hartwell's eyelids fluttered. He stirred. His eyes opened, clouded with confusion, and focused on my face. "Easy, Mr. Hartwell," I said softly. "You've had a spell. You're in the bank. You're going to be fine." He tried to sit up, but I placed a firm, gentle hand on his shoulder. "Not yet. Just rest." Around us, the crowd murmured in amazement. The men who had stood by helplessly now looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't pity. It was something else. Respect. "How did you know what to do?" Ruth Caldwell asked, her voice full of wonder. "My father was a minister," I explained, my focus still on my patient. "I spent years visiting the sick. You learn to recognize the signs." When Doc Morrison finally arrived that evening, he found Samuel Hartwell resting comfortably. I gave him a detailed account of the symptoms and the care I had provided. The doctor, a gruff man in his 60s, listened with growing admiration. "You probably saved his life," he said after examining Samuel. "Another hour out in that cold could have been fatal. Where did you study medicine?" "I didn't," I corrected him. "I learned compassion and observation. Sometimes that's enough." Word of what I'd done spread through Copper Ridge even faster than the news of my rejection. By the next morning, the whispers had changed. I was no longer just the fat woman James Mitchell had sent packing. I was the woman who had saved Samuel Hartwell's life. It was a small distinction, but in a town where reputation was everything, it was enough. It was a beginning, a tiny crack of light in the darkness. And I realized with a jolt that I wasn't going to be on that Wednesday train back to Connecticut. My future was here, in this harsh, unforgiving place. I just had to be strong enough to claim it. But as I sat in the hotel restaurant that morning, I felt a pair of eyes on me, a gaze so intense it was like a physical touch. It wasn't one of the gossiping townspeople. It was someone new, a man sitting alone in the far corner, a man built like a mountain, with eyes the color of a coming storm. And he was watching me as if he knew every secret I had. The third morning brought the storm, not a blizzard of snow, but a possibility. I was finishing my coffee when Mrs. Henderson approached, her face alight with excitement. "Miss Campbell, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's about a business proposition." My guard went up immediately. In my experience, men with business propositions for women like me were rarely honorable, but curiosity won. I followed her to the hotel's small parlor. The man waiting there commanded the room just by standing in it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked dark hair and those same stormy gray eyes I'd felt on me in the restaurant. His clothes were well-made but practical. No city dandy, this one. He was power, solid, and rooted to the earth. He rose as I entered. "Miss Campbell, I'm Daniel Thornfield. I own the Broken Arrow Ranch, 20 miles north of town." His voice was deep with an accent I couldn't quite place. He extended a large calloused hand. His grip was firm, surprisingly gentle. "Mr. Thornfield," I said. "I wonder if you might spare me a few minutes," he said. "Dr. Morrison mentioned your assistance with Samuel Hartwell. He was quite impressed with your composure under pressure." "I only did what anyone would have," I said, uncomfortable with the praise. "No," Daniel said, his gaze direct and unflinching. "Most people would have stood by and waited for someone else to take charge. You acted. That takes a special kind of courage, which brings me to my proposition." He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving my face. "My ranch is isolated. The nearest doctor is a 3-hour ride away. In the last year, I've lost 2 good men to accidents that might have been survivable with immediate, knowledgeable care." Understanding began to dawn. "You're looking for someone with medical skills." "I'm looking for a medical coordinator," he clarified. "Someone to treat minor injuries, stabilize major ones, and manage our medical supplies. The position includes a private cabin, meals, and a salary of $25 a month." $25 a month. The amount was staggering. It was more than independence. It was a kingdom. It was too good to be true. "Mr. Thornfield," I said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, But I am not a trained nurse. My knowledge is entirely practical, learned through experience. Formal training didn't save Samuel Hartwell, he countered. Experience and good judgment did. Dr. Morrison said you knew exactly what to do, and more importantly, you did it without hesitation. I studied him, this enigma offering me a lifeline. There had to be a catch. Why me? And why are you ignoring the talk? You must know about my situation with Mr. Mitchell. A flicker of something hard and sharp crossed his face. James Mitchell is a fool, he said, his voice laced with steel. His loss is potentially my gain. He judges a book by its cover. I prefer to read the pages. The casual, blunt dismissal of James's judgment, delivered without a trace of pity for me, was like a splash of cold, clean water. This man wasn't offering me charity. He was offering me a job because he thought I was the best person for it. I would need to know more, I said, my heart beginning a slow, heavy beat of hope. Of course, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Which is why I'd like you to visit the ranch. Today, see the facilities, meet the men. No commitment required, just a look. The idea of escaping the prying eyes of Copper Ridge was intoxicating. Yes, I heard myself say. I'd like that. His wagon was as impressive as he was. Well-maintained, pulled by two magnificent horses that spoke of wealth and power. As we drove down Main Street, every curtain twitched, every head turned. The rejected bride leaving town with the territory's most powerful rancher. The gossip would be legendary. Do you mind the talk? Daniel asked, his eyes on the road. I'm beginning to think talk is what fuels this town, I replied. Let them talk, he said. What matters is what you build for yourself. The journey to the Broken Arrow was a revelation. He spoke of his ranch not just as a business, but as a legacy. He'd started with nothing and built an empire of 8,000 acres and 1,500 head of cattle. James Mitchell runs a decent small spread, Daniel said, a dismissive edge to his voice. But he lacks vision. He's content to be respectable. I've always been more interested in being successful. I sensed a history there, a rivalry that ran deeper than cattle prices. When we crested a hill and the Broken Arrow came into view, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a homestead. It was a small town, a sprawling main house of stone and timber, huge barns, bunkhouses, workshops, and a dozen other buildings. It was an operation of immense scale and meticulous planning. It's magnificent, I said, the word inadequate. It's built to last, he replied. He led me first to a separate, well-constructed building. The medical facility, he said. I stepped inside and gasped. It was a small, perfectly equipped hospital. It had 4 clean beds, locked cabinets filled with supplies, surgical instruments laid out on sterile trays, and rows of bottled medicines. This is more than I ever expected, I stammered. Injuries don't wait for convenience, he said grimly. I've learned that the hard way. He opened a leather-bound journal. It was filled with pages of his neat, precise handwriting, documenting every injury on the ranch for the past 5 years. He had recorded treatments, outcomes, and his own observations. He had been trying to teach himself medicine. Last spring, he said, his voice low, we lost a good man, Tom Bradley, kicked by a horse. I thought he was improving, but something went wrong in the night. By morning, he didn't finish. The pain was still raw in his voice. It was preventable. With proper knowledge, Tom would still be alive. That's why I need you. He then showed me the cabin that would be mine. It was small but perfect, with a stone fireplace, good light, and a view of the entire bustling ranch. It was a world of purpose, of hard, meaningful work. For the first time, I could picture myself in such a world. As we walked back toward the main house, a sudden commotion erupted from the main corral. Shouts, a man's cry of pain. Daniel's face hardened. He broke into a run, and I was right behind him. A young cowboy was on the ground, clutching his arm, his face pale with shock. Blood was soaking through his shirt. What happened? Daniel demanded. Horse threw him into the fence, another cowboy said. Cut his arm up bad on a broken rail. Daniel started to examine the wound, but my instincts took over. May I? I asked, but I was already kneeling, gently moving the young man's hand. The cut was deep, a wicked gash that was bleeding freely, but my practiced eyes saw that it had missed the major arteries. It was clean, but it would need stitches. A lot of them. I can do this, I said, my voice steady. If you have the supplies. Daniel's stormy eyes locked on mine. There was a question in them, a test. We have everything you need, he said. Show me. We helped the injured cowboy, Pete, to the medical facility. Inside, I felt a strange sense of belonging. This was my world. Hot water, clean cloths, and your suture kit, I directed Daniel, my voice crisp with authority. He moved to obey without hesitation. As I cleaned the wound, Pete looked at me with wide, curious eyes. You really know what you're doing, ma'am. I've had some practice, I said, threading the needle with a steady hand. As I began to stitch the wound closed, my movements small and precise, I was acutely aware of Daniel watching my every move. This was my audition, the most important one of my life. I didn't just need this job. For the first time, I wanted it. I wanted this cabin, this work, this chance. When I was done, the wound was neatly closed, the arm bandaged. Keep it clean, I told Pete. Come back in 3 days so I can check for infection. So, you're taking the job? Pete asked, a hopeful grin spreading across his face. The room went silent. Every cowboy who had gathered to watch, Daniel, Pete, they were all looking at me, waiting. I looked at the clean, well-equipped room. I thought of the cozy cabin, of the $25 a month, of the respect in Daniel Thornfield's eyes. I thought of James Mitchell's pity and my stepmother's scorn. The only way forward is forward. Yes, I said, my voice ringing with a certainty I had never felt before. I believe I am. The smile that broke across Daniel Thornfield's rugged face was like the sun coming out after a long, cold storm. It was the beginning of everything, but I had no idea that my first real test wasn't stitching up a cowboy's arm. It was waiting for me in the breaking pen, in the form of a wild-eyed Mustang and a man lying motionless in the dirt. My real trial by fire was about to begin. My first week at the Broken Arrow was a blur of work and wonder. The cowboys, initially wary of a woman giving them medical orders, quickly came to respect my no-nonsense competence. They'd seen me stitch up Pete with the skill of a seasoned surgeon, and in their world, results were the only thing that mattered. My greatest ally turned out to be the ranch's gruff, one-handed cook, a man they called Cookie. His real name was Cornelius Blackwood, and he'd been a surgeon's assistant in the war. You've got steady hands, Miss Campbell, he said on my third day, watching me organize the medical supplies. Learned by necessity, I told him. Best way, he'd grunted. Nothing teaches you medicine like blood on your hands and a man's life depending on your next move. We formed an unlikely partnership. He shared his hard-won knowledge of trauma, and I shared my more formal understanding of illness and disease. Together, we turned the medical facility into a true frontier hospital. Daniel Thornfield watched it all with a quiet, intense satisfaction. He came by daily asking intelligent questions, his stormy eyes missing nothing. Our conversations were always professional, but I felt something else simmering beneath the surface. A current of mutual respect that was as powerful as an undertow. You've exceeded my expectations, he told me one evening. I was documenting the week's cases in the medical log, my handwriting as precise as his. The men are good patients, I replied, stoic and sensible. Unlike some people, he said with a hint of a smile, I notice you've been taking your meals in your cabin. Cookie says you refuse to eat in the main house. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. The truth was, I was afraid. I didn't know my place. Was I staff or something more? The uncertainty kept me in the safe solitude of my cabin. I didn't want to impose, I said. Margaret, he said, and the sound of my first name from his lips sent a jolt through me. You are not a servant here. You are a professional. I expect you to join me for dinner tomorrow evening. There are matters we should discuss. The invitation was a command, and it both thrilled and terrified me. The next day, Saturday, the ranch's calm was shattered by screams from the breaking pen. I looked out the window to see men running, their voices tight with panic. I grabbed my medical bag and ran with them. Inside the pen, a young cowboy, Jake Morrison, lay motionless in the dirt. At the far end, a wild-eyed Mustang, its coat slick with sweat, reared and plunged, a terrifying force of pure panic. The other men were frozen outside the fence, too afraid to go in. "What happened?" I demanded. "Horse threw him and kicked him in the head," the foreman, Bill Sawyer, said, his face grim. "He ain't moved since." My medical mind assessed the scene in a cold, clear flash. Jake was unconscious, likely with a serious head injury. He needed help now. But the horse was a storm of hooves and teeth. "Someone has to distract that horse while I get to Jake," I announced. "Too dangerous," Bill protested. "That Mustang's loco. He'll kill anyone who goes in there." "Then Jake will die," I stated flatly. "A head injury doesn't wait." Suddenly, Daniel was at my shoulder. He took in the scene with one sweeping glance. The downed man, the frantic horse, my determined face. "I'll handle the horse," he said, his voice a calm certainty in the chaos. "You focus on Jake." "Mr. Thornfield, that animal is past reason," Bill yelled. "Which is why we need to act now," Daniel said. And with a fluid grace that defied his size, he vaulted over the fence. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled over the fence right after him, my bag in one hand, my skirts in the other. The world narrowed to the dusty circle of that pen. Daniel moved slowly, deliberately toward the Mustang, his voice a low, soothing rumble, drawing the animal's terrified attention. He was putting his own life between the danger and me. I rushed to Jake's side. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow. A dark mat of blood soaked his hair. I saw instantly that his pupils were unequal, a terrible sign of pressure on the brain. "Jake!" I called, but there was no response. "How is he?" Daniel called out, his eyes never leaving the horse. "He's alive, but it's bad," I yelled back. "Serious concussion. We need to get him out of here now." Daniel had managed to back the horse into a corner, his sheer presence and calm will holding the panicked animal in place. "Ready!" he shouted. Cowboys swarmed into the pen, and under my direction, they carefully lifted Jake, keeping his head and neck completely still. We moved him like a fallen king to the medical facility. There, my training took over completely. I cleaned the wound, checking for skull fracture, my hands moving with a life of their own. Jake's continued unconsciousness was a terrifying sign. "Will he live?" Daniel asked. He was standing in the doorway, his shirt torn, his face smeared with dust, but his eyes were locked on me. "I don't know," I admitted. "He needs constant monitoring. The next 24 hours are critical. He has to be woken every hour, his responses checked. Any change could mean his brain is swelling." "You can't stay up all night," he protested. "This is why you hired me," I said firmly. "I won't risk his life to save myself some sleep." He studied my face for a long moment. "Then I'll stay with you," he said. "Two sets of eyes are better than one." And so began the long vigil. We sat in the quiet, lamp-lit room, the only sounds the ticking of the clock and Jake's shallow breathing. Every hour I would gently rouse him, check his pupils, ask him questions he couldn't yet answer. Between the checks, Daniel and I talked. We talked about everything: his university days back east, my studies at the seminary, his dream of building something permanent in this wild land, my dream of simply finding a place to belong. He wasn't just a rancher, he was a scholar, a builder, a leader. He saw things in me no one else ever had. He saw not a burden, but a partner. Near 2 in the morning, Jake moaned. I was at his side in an instant. "Jake, can you hear me? Can you tell me your name?" His eyes fluttered open. Confusion swirled in their depths, but then a flicker of recognition. "Miss Campbell?" he whispered, his voice slurred. "What happened?" "You had a run-in with a Mustang," I said, my heart soaring. "How do you feel?" He managed a weak grin. "Like I got kicked by a horse." Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. A patient who could joke was a patient who would live. I checked his pupils. They were nearly equal. "The crisis is passing," I told Daniel, my voice thick with emotion. "Because of you," he said, his voice low and intense. "You risked your life to get to him. You sat with him all night. You saved him." "Anyone would have done the same," I stammered, uncomfortable with the raw admiration in his eyes. "No," he said, stepping closer. His size seemed to fill the small room. Anyone would have found a reason not to. You saw what needed to be done, and you did it, regardless of the danger. That's rare courage, Margaret. The way he said my name, the warmth in his voice, it undid me. This powerful, capable man was looking at me not as the rejected bride, not as an employee, but as an equal, as a hero. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the ranch, Jake was awake and complaining about his headache. The danger had passed. I had won. I had faced down death and stared it in the eye. But as I stood on the porch of the medical facility, watching the ranch come alive, I knew another battle was just beginning. The look in Daniel Thornfield's eyes promised a future that was far more thrilling and far more terrifying than any medical emergency. My reputation as a healer was about to spread like a wildfire, and it would bring my past roaring back to my doorstep, forcing a confrontation I never saw coming. The story of Jake Morrison's rescue became a legend. Cowboys are natural storytellers, and with every telling, the Mustang grew wilder, the injury more dire, and my skills more miraculous. Within a week, the territory was buzzing. I wasn't just the woman who had saved the mill owner. I was the woman who had faced down a killer horse and cheated death. It started with a trickle, then became a flood. Ranchers from neighboring spreads began showing up at the Broken Arrow, bringing men with infected wounds, broken bones, and lingering fevers. Dr. Morrison himself rode out from Copper Ridge to see Jake, and after examining him, he shook my hand with genuine awe. "Remarkable," he'd said. "Your care made all the difference, Miss Campbell. You have a gift." His professional endorsement was like pouring gasoline on the fire. My little medical facility was becoming the go-to hospital for a 100-mile radius. "This is becoming more than we bargained for," Daniel observed one evening. We were in my cabin, which had become our nightly meeting place to discuss the day's cases. The line between employer and employee had blurred into a comfortable, easy friendship that hummed with unspoken electricity. "Are you concerned?" I asked. "Intrigued," he corrected. "You've created something essential here, Margaret. Something the territory desperately needs." The idea took root in my mind. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a calling, a chance to build something real. Our evening talks deepened. He told me of his past in Philadelphia, of his disillusionment with the politics and corruption of the East. "I came west to find something worth building," he said, his stormy eyes reflecting the starlight. "Out here, a man's worth is measured by what he accomplishes." "And a woman's?" I asked softly. His gaze met mine in the darkness. "A woman's worth is measured by her character and her courage. Though I should point out," he added, a slow smile spreading across his face, "that some of us appreciate both capability and appearance." The compliment, so simple and sincere, warmed me to my soul. And then, just as I was starting to believe I could have a future here, my past rode up to the gate. It was a bright, crisp morning when Bill Sawyer announced with some awkwardness that James Mitchell was here to see me. My heart dropped. I found him waiting by the porch of the medical facility, turning his hat over and over in his hands. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. "Miss Campbell," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Mr. Mitchell," I said, my voice neutral. "What can I do for you?" I owe you an apology," he began, the words rushing out. "My behavior when you arrived was ungentlemanly, cruel. I misjudged you." I was stunned into silence. "The whole territory is talking about you," he continued, his gaze fixed on his dusty boots. "Your skill, your courage. These are admirable qualities, valuable qualities, in a frontier wife." The world tilted on its axis. I finally understood. He wasn't just here to apologize. "Mr. Mitchell," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting we reconsider our arrangement," he burst out. "I see now that character and competence matter more than other considerations." I stared at him, speechless. The man who had rejected me for my size, who had publicly humiliated me, was now proposing marriage again. Not because he desired me, but because I had become a local celebrity. I was no longer a burden. I was an asset. And your children? I asked, my voice cold. Sarah was quite clear about her feelings. Children adapt, he said dismissively. They would learn to appreciate you. My position here, I began. Working for Daniel Thornfield? He scoffed. That's not a permanent solution. You deserve the security of marriage, not a job that could end tomorrow. His condescending dismissal of my work, of the life I was building, ignited a fury in me that was white hot. Mr. Mitchell, my work here is not just a job. It is deeply satisfying in a way I doubt you could ever understand. But you can't intend to be a spinster all your life, he protested aghast. Marriage and motherhood are a woman's natural destiny. Before I could unleash the tirade boiling in my throat, a voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as splintered ice. I believe Miss Campbell is quite capable of determining her own destiny. Daniel stepped onto the porch. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace, and his presence made James Mitchell physically shrink back. He looked like a wolf facing a grizzly bear. Thornfield, James stammered. This is a private conversation. So I gathered, Daniel said, his voice dangerously calm. Though I'm curious what personal matter brings you to my ranch to harass my employee. I'm not harassing anyone. I made Miss Campbell a respectable offer of marriage. After rejecting her 3 weeks ago, Daniel observed, his eyes glinting like steel, how very generous of you to reconsider now that she's proven her value to the entire territory. The tension between them was a palpable thing, an old, bitter rivalry I was only just beginning to understand. My reasons are my own business, James said stiffly. As are Miss Campbell's reasons for declining, I said, rising from my chair. My voice was steady, my resolve absolute. Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate your reconsidered offer, but I must decline. My life is here now. His face crumpled with disappointment and wounded pride. Thornfield may appreciate your skills now, he sneered, but his interest will fade. Remember that respectable marriage is still an option when you tire of playing doctor for cowboys. He mounted his horse and rode away, a bitter, defeated man. The silence he left behind was thick with unspoken things. I'm sorry you had to witness that, I said finally. I'm not, Daniel replied, his voice firm. It's past time someone told him the truth about himself. He wasn't entirely wrong, though, I admitted, the fear a cold knot in my stomach. My position here is dependent on your goodwill. Daniel turned to face me, his expression serious, intense. Margaret, is that truly what you think? That I would dismiss you on a whim? He stepped closer, closing the space between us. Then perhaps it's time we made your position more permanent. I've been considering a proposition, a partnership. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was he talking about business or something else? I believe, he continued, his voice dropping, becoming a low, intimate rumble that vibrated through my very bones, that our arrangement here could be the foundation for something much greater, something that lasts a lifetime. He was looking at me with an intensity that stripped away all my defenses. It wasn't just respect in his eyes anymore. It was admiration, it was affection, it was a promise of a future I had never ever dared to dream of for myself. He wasn't offering me a job, or security, or even just marriage. He was offering me a partnership, in every sense of the word, and in that moment I knew my life would never be the same. The choice was no longer about survival. It was about what and who I truly wanted. Daniel's proposition wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a blueprint. Over the next few days, he laid out a vision that left me breathless. He didn't just want me to stay on as a ranch medic. He wanted to build a real medical practice with me, a partnership that would serve the entire region. I'll provide the facilities, the equipment, the financial backing, he explained one evening over dinner in the main house, a meal I no longer felt uncomfortable attending. But the practice itself would be yours. We would structure it as a formal partnership. You would have controlling interest, 60%. I nearly dropped my fork. He was offering me ownership, power, autonomy. You're proposing I become a frontier doctor, I said, the words tasting foreign and wonderful. I'm proposing you become what you already are, he corrected gently, a skilled medical practitioner. This would just give you the security and the resources to reach your full potential. It was everything I could have ever wanted. Professional respect, financial independence, meaningful work that saved lives. But I had to know. And what do you gain from this, Daniel? This is extraordinarily generous. His serious expression softened. I gain the satisfaction of building something worthwhile with someone I respect and admire more than anyone I've ever known. He paused, his gray eyes searching mine. The ranch, the men, this entire community. We are all better for having you here. This just makes it permanent. Is there something else? I pressed, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. He hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Yes, there is. His voice dropped, becoming intimate, personal. Personally, Margaret, I hope that by working this closely together, by building this practice, we might build other things as well. That a business partnership might lead to a more personal one. The admission hung in the air between us, a bridge of terrifying, beautiful possibility. My heart was a wild thing in my chest. He was talking about a future, our future. Daniel, I began, my voice trembling slightly. Your proposal is overwhelming. I need time to consider. Take all the time you need, he said, but his eyes told me he hoped my answer would be yes. As autumn bled into the first hints of winter, our lives settled into a new rhythm. My medical practice exploded. Patients came from farther and farther away. Dr. Morrison began referring his most difficult cases to me. I was becoming an institution. And through it all, Daniel was my steadfast partner, handling the finances, ordering supplies, managing the logistics, freeing me to do what I did best, heal. But our personal relationship remained in a state of tantalizing limbo. He treated me with unwavering affection and respect, but he never crossed the line. He was waiting for me. He had given me the power, and he would let me decide the next step. And then winter came. It didn't arrive gently. It descended on the territory with the force of a biblical plague, a furious blizzard that buried the world in a sea of white. I awoke to a howling wind and snow so thick I couldn't see the barn from my cabin. Cookie fought his way through the drifts to bring me coffee and grim news. 4 of the boys are missing, he said, his face etched with worry. Rode out yesterday to check the north pasture. Haven't returned. My mind snapped into emergency mode. Exposure, frostbite, hypothermia. Daniel's organizing search parties, but it's a suicide mission out there. Visibility is 0. I bundled up and battled my way to the main house. Daniel was there, a general commanding his troops against an impossible enemy. Margaret, he said, relief washing over his face when he saw me. I need you to prepare the medical facility. If we find them alive, they'll be in a bad way. I'm ready, I said. Then I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his thick coat. Daniel, be careful. Don't take foolish risks. He covered my hand with his gaze softening. I won't abandon my men, Margaret. I'll be back. The hours that followed were agonizing. The storm raged. The world was a white hell. I paced the floor of the medical facility, surrounded by warm blankets and medical supplies, praying I wouldn't have to use them. Late in the afternoon, I heard shouts. A search party was returning, half carrying 2 figures through the blinding snow. It was Daniel's team. Get them inside, he roared, his voice cutting through the wind. Margaret, we need you. They brought in 2 men. Young Tommy Rodriguez was unconscious, his skin a deathly blue-white. Old Pete Jameson was conscious, but shivering so violently, his teeth sounded like castanets. Daniel, his own face raw from the cold, was supporting him. Found them in a collapsed line shack, he reported, without heat for at least 12 hours. I went to work. My voice was calm, my commands precise, my hands steady. This was my battleground. Tommy was critical, his heartbeat slow and irregular. Severe hypothermia. Pete's heart condition made his case just as perilous. I was fighting a war on 2 fronts. Hot water bottles, warm blankets, brandy, I ordered Cookie. Daniel, help me get Tommy's wet clothes off. We have to re-warm him, but slowly. Too fast and it will send him into shock. The hours blurred into a desperate fight for life. I moved between the two men, checking pulses, listening to heartbeats, administering warm broth, adjusting blankets. Daniel never left my side. He was my hands, my support, my rock in the storm. He followed every order without question, his presence a silent, steady source of strength. Near midnight, I felt a change. Tommy's pulse was growing stronger, more regular. His color was returning. Pete's shivering had subsided, his breathing evening out. I think they're past the worst of it, I announced, relief making my knees weak. They're going to make it. Daniel's broad shoulders sagged. He closed his eyes for a moment, and I saw the immense strain he'd been under. Just as we allowed ourselves a breath, the door burst open. Cookie stood there, his face frantic. "Miss Campbell, we need you at the main house. Mrs. Patterson from the next ranch just rode through this hellstorm. Says her husband's been crushed. A beam fell in their barn. He's alive, but he can't feel his legs. Spinal injury, in the middle of a blizzard." My blood ran cold. I grabbed my bag, restocking it for a trauma case. "Cookie, watch them. You know what to do if their condition changes." "I'm coming with you," Daniel said, already pulling on his frozen coat. "It's too dangerous," I protested. "And too dangerous for you to go alone," he countered firmly. "A man with a spinal injury needs to be moved. You'll need my strength." The journey to the Patterson Ranch was a nightmare. The wind tore at us. The snow blinded us. We fought for every foot. I huddled against Daniel's solid warmth, drawing on his courage. We found Henry Patterson pinned under a massive roof beam in his collapsed barn. He was conscious, his face a mask of agony and terror. "Can't feel my legs," he whispered as I knelt beside him. Am I ever going to walk again?" I performed the most complex examination of my life by the flickering light of a lantern, in a freezing barn, with a blizzard raging outside. I tested reflexes, checked for sensation, tried to assess the damage to his spine. "There's spinal involvement," I concluded, "but I can detect some faint sensation. The damage may not be permanent. The key is to get him immobilized and moved to my facility for proper care." "Move him? In this storm?" Mrs. Patterson cried. The choice was impossible. Moving him could cause more damage. Leaving him could mean he'd die from his injuries or the cold. Daniel looked at me, his face grim. He was leaving the decision to me. I was the doctor. "We move him," I said, my voice ringing with a certainty I didn't feel. "We move him now." What followed was 2 hours of desperate, grueling work. We used broken boards from the barn to create a makeshift spine board, immobilizing Henry with painstaking care. The journey back was an epic of raw will. I rode in the back of the wagon with Henry, monitoring his vital signs, while Daniel fought the storm and the drifts, driving the team with sheer brute force. We arrived back at the Broken Arrow just before dawn, exhausted, frozen, but triumphant. We had done the impossible. As we carefully transferred Henry to a warm bed in the medical center, the storm finally began to show signs of breaking. I had been working for 18 straight hours, fighting for 3 lives against the worst nature could throw at us. Daniel stood with me on the porch, watching the first gray light of dawn. "Margaret," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion, "what you did tonight, it was extraordinary. You saved 3 men." I just shook my head, too tired to speak. "You have proven yourself beyond any doubt," he continued, turning to face me. His hands came up to cup my face, his thumbs gently stroking my cold cheeks. "As a medical practitioner, and as the most remarkable woman I have ever known." He looked at me then, in the gray morning light, and I saw everything in his eyes. The respect, the admiration, the partnership, and something deeper. Something that had been forged in the fire of this long, terrible night. "I don't want to be your business partner anymore, Margaret," he said softly. My heart stopped. "I want to be your partner in life. I want to build everything with you. Marry me." It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a declaration. In the aftermath of the storm, in the quiet of the new day, everything was finally perfectly clear. This was my home. This was my work. This was my man. And my answer was the easiest one I had ever given in my entire life. Spring came to Colorado like a promise fulfilled. The snows melted, the plains turned green, and the world was reborn, and so was I. Our wedding was in the garden behind the main house, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The entire ranch was there, along with families from 100 miles around. Patients, friends, people whose lives I had touched. Dr. Morrison performed the ceremony, and my maid of honor, holding a bouquet of wildflowers and beaming with pride, was 10-year-old Sarah Mitchell. My life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. Henry Patterson was walking, slowly, with a cane, but he was walking. James Mitchell, humbled and grateful after I'd saved his son Thomas from a raging pneumonia that winter, had become a tentative friend. He had finally seen beyond my appearance to the person I was. More importantly, his daughter Sarah had found a hero. She spent every Saturday at my side in the medical center, my eager and brilliant apprentice, her mind as sharp as any scalpel. My partnership with Daniel was everything he had promised and more. It was a union of equals, a joining of two people building something larger than themselves. The Broken Arrow Medical Center, as it was now officially known, became a beacon of hope in the territory. We were a team. He managed the ranch, growing its prosperity to fund our expanding vision. I managed the medical center, which now included a new wing for long-term patients and a training program for nurses. My name became known throughout the territories. They didn't call me the rejected bride anymore. They called me the Angel of the Rockies. Life was full, and it was about to become fuller still. 2 years after our wedding, as I stood on the porch of our home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and rose, Daniel came to stand behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist. My hand went to my belly, where our child, our daughter, was growing. "Any regrets?" he whispered, his chin resting on my shoulder. I thought of the long, lonely journey from Hartford. I thought of James Mitchell's shocked face, the whispers, the humiliation. They seemed like scenes from someone else's life, a sad story I'd once read. "None," I said. "Everything, even the worst of it, led me here. To you." Just then, a rider galloped into the ranch yard, his horse lathered. He carried a telegram. "Dr. Thornfield," he shouted. "It's from the territorial governor's office." Daniel read it over my shoulder. There was a diphtheria outbreak in Golden Valley, 100 miles east. The local doctor was dead, and the town was in a panic. They were officially requesting my assistance. An hour later, I was supervising the loading of a medical wagon with antitoxin, isolation supplies, and everything we would need to fight a plague. Sarah Mitchell, now a competent young woman of 15, moved with a nurse's efficiency at my side. "Should I inform Mr. Thornfield that you'll be leaving?" she asked. I smiled. "He already knows. He's packing his own bags. He insists on supervising any mission where his wife might be in danger." The Golden Valley expedition became the stuff of legend. We rode into a town gripped by terror, and for 3 grueling weeks we fought the disease house by house, life by life. We established a quarantine, treated the sick, and comforted the dying, and we won. We broke the back of the outbreak and saved the town. When we returned, another delegation was waiting for us. This one didn't carry a telegram. It included 3 territorial legislators and a representative from the Denver Medical College. They had a proposition. A new position was being created by the territorial government, Territorial Medical Director, with authority over all public health matters in Colorado. They were offering it to me. I would have the power and the resources to build a network of clinics, to set training standards, to bring modern medicine to every corner of this wild land. The Broken Arrow Medical Center would become the headquarters. They wanted to take my vision and make it the law of the land. I stood in our study that night, the official offer on the desk in front of me, my hand resting on my unborn child. I was 29 years old. I had started as a mail-order bride, rejected for being too large to fit into one man's small life. Now they were asking me to be responsible for the health of an entire territory. "It's unprecedented," Daniel said, his voice filled with awe. "It's terrifying," I admitted. "You're already doing it," he said simply. "This just gives you the title you've already earned." I looked out the window at the medical center, a beacon of light and healing in the vast darkness. I had built that. We had built that. The woman who had been told she took up too much space had created a space for everyone to heal. "I'll accept," I said, a quiet certainty settling over me. Our child would be born into a world where their mother didn't just fit in, she helped build it. 3 months later, I gave birth to our daughter in the very room where I had stitched up my first cowboy. We named her Hope. As I held her in my arms, a tiny, perfect bundle of life, I looked at my husband, my partner, the man who had seen my worth when no one else had. I looked at the thriving medical center outside my window. I thought of the network of clinics we would build, the lives we would save, the future we would create. The journey had been long and impossibly hard, but it had led me here, to a love large enough for all my dreams. I had learned that sometimes being too much for a small mind just means you're exactly the right size for a great purpose. The rejected bride had found her home, not in a man's house, but in a life of service, a legacy of healing, and a love as vast and enduring as the Colorado sky itself. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. We've got new stories coming every week that you won't want to miss. Click that bell so you're the first to know when they drop. And let us know in the comments. What's the biggest obstacle you've ever had to overcome? We'd love to hear your story.